first hybrid event in the US. For those tuning in, we're coming to you live from USET's new home at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. My name is Julia Chantel, and I am the founding president and executive chair of the US-China Education Trust. Since 1998, USET has worked to strengthen mutual understanding between the US and China through educational exchanges, academic conferences, policy dialogues, professional workshops, and programs like this one. As Asian Americans have found themselves caught in the crossfires of US-China rivalry and the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, USET feels compelled to raise Asian Americans' own voice and visibility to fight racism and hatred. We are so delighted today to celebrate Ambassador Chantel Wong as the first out lesbian and first LGBTQ+ woman appointed to an ambassador level position ever in US history. I would clap if I had two hands. This is the fourth program in USET's Asian Women Trailblazer series, which we launched last year to recognize the achievements that Asian women have contributed to American society. In just a moment, you will learn what a unique, powerful, and impressive background Ambassador Wong has. But for now, let me just note that she is a 3-time presidential appointee, having been named by President Clinton as the alternate US director to the ADB, and by President Obama as the vice president for administration and finance and chief financial officer of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Formerly, but the budget director at NASA and acting budget director at the US Treasury Department. She also founded the Conference on Asian Pacific American Leadership, an organization which has inspired and empowered so many young AAPIs to work in public service. Today, we are doubly honored as we present a pre-recorded video of Ambassador Linda Taoyang, who preceded Ambassador Wong. Unfortunately, Ambassador Young, a robust 95, unfortunately could not be with us today. As the first woman and minority to represent the US on the board of a multilateral financial institution, Ambassador Young paved the way for Ambassador Chantel Wong. Today, we are really celebrating 2 generations of trailblazing Chinese American women at the ADB. And I would like to thank our event partner, the 1990 Institute, who share our common goal of helping all Americans better understand the Asian American experience. Trenton, let's now begin with Ambassador Linda Taoyang's video.
I know Chantel very well. I've known her for more than 30 years. I'm really proud that she will work on a job that I had more than 30 years ago. The most qualified person to do that. I feel very proud and very happy. China has developed in the last 40 years spectacularly well. And many developing countries, not just in Asia, globally, look at what China accomplished. So China has tremendous influence by example, and the fact they're second largest economy, and of course, after Japan, the United States, probably the 3rd largest shareholder. So therefore, certainly exerts a lot of influence. All over Asia and in China as well, climate change, the impact not only on the health and well-being of this generation, but for many generations to come. And Chantel is really very expert in that area. She could coalesce a lot of people to work with her. That is a matter of common concern, regardless of your thinking this way or that way. And also, that would, I think, persuade people to be more cooperative with her. Your life did not begin the day you were born. Because in you, there were generations of people working and your ancestors embedded in you. So I remember he said, so make sure you leave something behind for other people. You are only a link in the chain. Leave something behind for some others.
I think this is a historic moment. 3 Chinese American women ambassadors in one room. 30 years ago, this could not have happened. Why? 30 years ago, there were no Asian American ambassadors, male or female. I became the first Asian American ambassador in US history in 1989. Linda Caoyang followed shortly in 1993 to 1999. Now we have Ambassador Chantel Wong in 2022. Chantel, I kind of like calling you ambassador. There's a nice ring to it, don't you think?
I like it too, yes.
Now, would you like to take a few minutes and tell us a little about yourself, your journey to this position, and how it feels to return to the ADB after 22 years? We can't be that old, Chantel. How is the bank different? And what challenges are you facing as you begin your tenure this time?
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Linda, who has been, as she said, my mainstay for 30 years. I actually didn't know anything about the ADB until I visited my sister in the Philippines over 30 years ago and visited her. She was sitting in the seat that I have now, and she tried to convince me to come to Manila. And I said, Manila? No, that's too far, too backwards. I don't think I would want to come. It took 5 additional years before they actually convinced me to join the ADB as actually staff. So I was staff. I was trained in my undergraduate and one of my graduate degrees as a water and wastewater engineer. I don't know if you know that. So I joined the ADB as an environment specialist. I had a career in wastewater treatment and operating sewage treatment plants in San Francisco. So I joined the ADB then, and subsequently, very shortly thereafter, was appointed by President Clinton to be the alternate U.S. executive director. By the way, that was not easy either. And the story is that there's this coalition of people that it's never alone. This journey is never alone. And there's always people there that helps you along the way. At that time, Larry Summers was the Secretary of Treasury. They had a different candidate that they wanted in this position as the alternate. And I was very lucky because I was very active in the Asian American community, Asian American politics. I was very lucky to have gotten to know Maria Haley. I don't know if any of you know Maria Haley. She was President Clinton's I think economic advisor in the Clinton administration in Arkansas, in Little Rock. And when President Clinton came to Washington, she came with him, and she rose to be the deputy director at the Presidential Personnel Office. And when Larry Summers said, we want this other person, Maria said, no, we want Chantel. So that's how eventually.
That's how Washington.
That's how
works.
Washington works, exactly. And certainly the journey to get this position was also very much, there were coalitions of people that were there to help. But going back on the sort of the personal journey a little bit, I was born in Shanghai. We talked about that earlier, to parents that of modest means. And it was 1954 when I was born. In 1960, I don't know if many of you Chinese history buffs may remember, that was the Great Famine caused by the Great Leap Forward. And people, I think there was an estimation of 28 to 50 million people that died of famine. My parents made the ultimate sacrifice for me to leave the country on the bottom of a boat. We escaped from China with my grandmother. And that
She hid you, right?
she hit me, yes. So we got into China, got into Hong Kong at the time, and that was that period of time. I remember distinctly that many were, killed to make an example. You want to escape from China? Here's what happens. Many were floated into the harbor of Hong Kong to show that this is not what you should be doing. So those were the circumstances of which I escaped. And over the years of my life and my career, I have been supported by, as Linda has mentioned, many others. And many of you may know her, but Alice Rivlin was the other mentor that I've had over 30 plus years that I've been here. And then the last 4 years, I've been very lucky to be close to John Lewis. I was his photographer and videographer for the last 4 years. So all of that has really helped me and nurtured me to be who I am today.
That's a marvelous story. I mean, it could be a movie.
I think I want to make a movie, yes.
After you retire.
After
You retire. But let's go back to Ambassador Linda Taoyang's very warm introductory remarks. We can understand that many people are proud of you. She certainly showed her pride in you, Chantel, and her belief in you. Asian Americans are proud of you. The LGBTQ plus community is proud of you. Your Catholic high school is very proud of you. Guam proudly claims you as their own, touting you as a role model for girls in Guam. I'd say girls everywhere. Let me ask you, from your unique and impressive background, what are you most proud of?
Yeah, I think you mentioned this, the Conference on Asian Pacific American Leadership. That was the organization I helped found in the basement of my apartment when I first got here. And we found that Asian Americans were not in conversations at the table where resources were talked about, where policies were discussed in the public sphere. And so we found that it was very important to create an environment to encourage Asian Americans, actually to counter the mantra of Asian parents that says you got to be a doctor or a lawyer or something, that public service has never been a career that been pushed for Asian American parents. And so we wanted to be counter to that. So my biggest pride here is that this is an organization that's been 33 years in the making. And over the 33-year history, we've had lots of Asian Americans that have come through. They're now in positions of power in Grace May, for example, a congresswoman, David Chu, who's now state attorney general, Lucy Koh, who's a judge. And so I call them my mini me's. I have a lot of mini me's out there. and that is my proudest moment.
And as you should be proud. Let's expand a little bit on this theme, because we have a lot of people in the audience who are young, aspiring to be you. And Linda, probably too. So why is it important for Asian Americans to choose a career in I see. I had to turn it off. So let me repeat. Let's expand a little bit on why it is important for Asian Americans to choose a career in public service. Why is it important for Asian Americans to be at the table?
Oh, yes, certainly, if you're not, I guess somebody said, if you're not there at the table, you become the meal. So it is very important where there are resource allocations that are being talked about. There are immigration policy, education policy. All of these have huge impact on the community. And if we're not at the table and we're not part of the conversation, it just doesn't happen. Our issues are not talked about.
Absolutely right. But can you give a few examples? As I said, I'm still thinking about the audience that's not with us, but they're somewhere in cyber.
Cyberspace.
Right. Give us some examples. For example, you were at the Millennium Corporation, and you worked on development issues. So, was there a program in particular that you thought was really meaningful to Asian Americans?
Well, development issues are always important to us. You know, certainly, I didn't work on Afghanistan at the time, but at ADB I did, and I remember those issues. Failed states will come back to us if we weren't there. And now, 20 years later, we kind of see what the challenges are. Burma, I've been really very active in it. Most recently, now the humanitarian crisis that's there now, but it does impact those that I see it even for LGBTQ, where they are criminalized and they can't live in that community anymore. They have to come, you know, they come and seek refuge here in the United States. So those are all kind of issues that revolve and involve our community. And then, of course, we talked, you mentioned it a little bit about the Asian hate that's been because of the challenges, the competition between China and the United States. It becomes we become the scapegoat in our community because of the economic tensions between the two countries.
We're going to get back to some of these points a little bit later, but I don't want you to get away without telling us more about Guam. How you explained a little bit of how you got out of China. That story, absolutely a movie. But we will be celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month in May. It's just around the corner. And often the Pacific Islanders don't get as much attention as they should. Tell us from your perspective, how did going to school in Guam affect your perspectives about Asian Pacific issues? What are the issues that are really important to Pacific Islanders versus Asian Americans?
Yeah, so ADB covers actually all the way from the countries we cover, the Central Asian republics to the Pacific Islands. And the Pacific Islands in particular have unique challenges because they're so isolated. I ended up in Guam because it's actually a movie. Really, it does need.
We will watch for it. We'll watch for it, Chantel.
It does require a movie because my aunt. So I left my parents behind, and I was not to see them for 21 years.
21 years.
Yeah. So that's the epic scene. When 21 years later, I went to visit. I took a long train ride from Guangzhou to Shanghai. And as I was coming off the train, I don't remember, this is 21, I left at 6, I was 27 by the time I returned home. And I hadn't seen my parents for that long. I had never seen my brother, he was born after I left. So the scene for the movie is actually the train getting into Shanghai Station with millions of people, and I'm trying to figure out where my parents are and what they look like. But getting back to the Guam story, so I lived with my aunt and uncle and followed them. They raised me, followed them from Hong Kong because of a family scandal. We moved to Okinawa, and then by the time we got to Okinawa in 1972, Japan had recognized China, and those of us that were escapees from China, we were holding actually these Hong Kong CI. We're basically citizens with no country. Hong Kong certificate of identity. They were traveling documents, and those of us that were to stay, they say you have to carry a red Chinese passport, and we said, no, we don't think so. We escaped from that country. So that was the time we decided to move to Okinawa, to Guam, from Okinawa. We followed the B-52s. This was at the height of the Vietnam conflict. The B-52s left Okinawa to go to Guam. And so we did too. And there, it's a small island. I was nurtured by Catholic nuns. I've been actually Catholic all my life, but certainly the Catholic nuns really took care of me, nurtured me, and shaped my view. There's another story about my name, Chantel. It's actually named after Saint James de Chantel, my patron saint. It's aptly named because it's the patron saint of the forgotten people. And so I didn't recognize that.
Perfect for your career now at the ADB.
Yes, Saint Jane de Chantel is my patron saint. But anyway, so the nuns there really took care of me, nurtured me, taught me what about public service, about service to others, and it's ingrained in me, the Pacific Island, and so I am very focused on the island economies and what their needs are, and the US's footprint in the Pacific Island, some of it not so pretty, and we have to make good on those as well.
Let's talk about your Catholicism. You brought it up. The nuns at the academy where you went to high school fiercely supported your presidential nomination this time. I was very moved by the letter they wrote in support of your nomination. So what role has religion and Catholicism specifically played in your life and career choices?
Yeah, I think faith is huge and impactful in my life, and I see that in various places. And maybe going backwards, this time I spent with John Lewis, going every year for the last 4 years over the bridge, Selma to Selma, Alabama, Montgomery, and Birmingham. All of that, the complete civil rights movement is around faith and the church, the religion, and how the church really provided the strength in times of really challenge and difficult times. Faith has always been there to help bring that community out. And that's the same with me, you know, and I've had many challenges in life, but faith has always been there to guide me and help me through the next day.
Without it, what would have happened?
Wow. I think it gives me optimism. You know, I think that is what gives me the courage to go on to the next day, knowing that there is a higher power to help me through it.
I think we all need it. Now, let's talk a little bit about your confirmation, because as I mentioned, the nuns wrote a wonderful letter about supporting your nomination. In this polarized America and the US Congress, you were confirmed by a bipartisan vote of 66-31. That is an incredible achievement for those of us who are denizens of Washington. How did that happen? How did you make that happen? How did you manage to win 31 Republican votes? Was this a victory for Asian Americans, or for the LGBTQ community, or meritocracy? Your resume is beyond reproach, impeccable, and you certainly have raised the bar for being an eminently qualified nominee. So tell us.
Well, actually, I lost 31 Republicans.
Oh, you lost?
It was 66-31. The 31 was the Republicans.
Oh, I was thinking just you got the 30, but
I did get 17
Okay,
Republicans,
okay.
so that's actually
bad. See, I could never be a budget director.
I can't. It's very hard because you're in billions rather than these small numbers. But 17, yes, it was hard work. There's a huge coalition. As I mentioned, it's never alone. You know, thank God that I have been in the trenches. I was in Arizona. We did the presidential election. It so happens that go back to the API community in key battleground states. Now the Asian American community is actually the margin of victory.
Really?
Yeah, and so this is what the numbers tell us. And so the 20 and every election cycle, I've volunteered to go into battleground states. And this year, this cycle, I was in Arizona, and we were able to get President Biden. It was the first state that flipped. If you remember, see, Fox called Biden early on that evening. I think by then I was fast asleep because it was so exhausting. We left everything on the table. And then a month later, we were in Georgia. And all of this, Julia, is because I was with John Lewis on Selma, on the bridge in Selma, one last time, March 2020, I remember. I was this close to him. I had my right hand on his back, holding him up because he was very ill. You remember he passed away shortly thereafter. And he told us, you know, he was very weak. He had lost a lot of weight, and his voice was booming. He says, "We have to vote like we've never voted before." And because of that, I went to Georgia a month after the presidential, and we flipped. And Asian Americans were the margin of victory. I mean, there were many other communities.
Why isn't that better known?
I don't know. It is really critical. I mean, Stacey Abrams, of course, brought a lot of the community together. it's really a coalition, but Asian Americans, definitely. So we went and knocked on every single Asian American door that we could find in Atlanta, in Savannah, in Macon, and we were able to flip the 2 seats in the Senate. And there, we had 50-50. We got the presidential, we got the Senate, and without those, I don't think I could have gotten here.
Some Republicans blame Trump for losing Georgia. That's just interesting politics.
And they blame him for losing Arizona for sure.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Cindy McCain, right?
Well, I guess this is not a political discussion, so.
But I want to say that there's huge coalition of communities that have come out to support me. It's never one that's alone. The Asian American community was very, very critical. Senator Duckworth was my biggest champion, and she pushed to get me on the voting, roll call, to get me through cloture, to get me through the confirmation vote. I did actually do an analysis of all the EDs that have come before me, including Linda, all the way to 1981. I think nobody has had to go through a roll call vote. And I went through 2.
I did not have to go through.
And that's the way of life now. It's the roll
Yeah.
call vote, and you have to have bipartisan. I mean, it's no longer a thing you can get through by just one party. And so working on the coalitions, working to figure out who that could be part of you, and looking through the Asian American community that has ties, the LGBTQ community that brings it together. So all of the coalition, I have now been telling the whole community that there's a lot of expectations on my shoulder, because I owe where I am to everybody that has brought me here.
I need to make a comment here, I think, because, I became an ambassador in 1989. To be very honest, the Asian American community was, it's not because of me or anything like that, but they were just not on the scene. And they were not at the table at that time. That's a long time ago. So Asian Americans have come a long way. But I would still say that there's a lot longer way to go. Oh, I think we should start having questions from the floor. But before we do that, I do want to ask you a question about the ADB. There are some 30 years, as Ambassador Cao Yang said, between her and your tenure at the bank. The world today, as I just alluded to, is really radically different. The biggest difference, of course, being China's economic power and standing in the region. How do you see these changes affecting your job? And what do you think you will have to do differently than Ambassador Cao Yang?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I've done a lot of thinking about it, because bipartisan on the Hill and everywhere, there is huge angst around the China competition. And so we have to, so first of all, ADB 20 years ago or 30 years ago was the only game in town. It was the bank that all these developing member countries to go to. Today it's not. There's AIIB, there's the China National Development Bank. So what I have said is that we have to really get ADB to the position that it is the lender of choice to our member countries. Therefore, we have to, and that's the goal that I'm going to bring to. And because of my experience in terms of organizational development, budget, finance, looking at effectiveness, my goal is to get ADB to the level, to the place where it's providing quality products and services to meet the needs of our DMCs. And that means better organization structurally. And so we are going through a organizational review.
Every decade you do this, right? Is that
Yes.
the one, the operations review?
Well, the org review, yes. They're also going through a safeguards review. So all of that is really coming through. And we are facing, I would say, multiple crises going on in the region. There's the climate crisis, as Linda talked about. It is really existential. It's food security, huge issues that's facing our DMCs and Pacific Island countries. Some of them are going to be going under because of climate change. There is the crisis. The pandemic has not quite finished with us in the region. We know a particular challenge in China now with the zero tolerance. Pacific Island countries, actually, they've been so isolated. They've really passed the Delta and the Omicron. Now the numbers are actually surging in Pacific Island countries. But the economies of all of our member countries have really taken a huge hit because of the pandemic. And so how do we build back? And we talk about build back better in Washington parlance. And yes, building back better for these member countries. And then finally, the invasion of Russia on Ukraine has huge economic consequences, particularly for those countries in the Central Asian republics that are tied. Their economies are tied to Russia economy, but also the energy prices going up, food prices going up, and case in point, you look at Sri Lanka. There's going to be huge instability in that country because of fuel prices, and there might be other countries that are going to be facing the same thing. So those are really huge crises, and this bank needs to meet those challenges. And it used to be a pure infrastructure bank, but you cannot meet these challenges with just infrastructure. We do still need infrastructure. The DMCs still need them, but we have to deal with the climate crisis, and that's mitigation, adaptation. So how do we engage the developing member countries on policy dialogues? How do we get that their economy going on the right track to help them build back better, whether it's digital economy or more resilient redevelopment?
Given your background, you're in the right place at the right time, but I don't envy the burden that you're holding. Let's turn to the floor for questions. Anybody with a question? Please say your name first and then your affiliation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Wong. My name is Brian Schell. I am the Secretary of the Asian American Foreign Affairs Association, which is an employee affinity group at the Department of State. One of the comments you made early on really stuck with me, talking about China and our interactions, the United States' interactions with China, and how it affects Asian Americans here domestically. And the Asian Development Bank, having China be one of its large shareholders, I'm sure you talk a lot about China and what China does. And oftentimes these conversations in the foreign policy sphere use certain parlance to not oversimplify, but use parlance in a certain way. We talk about Chinese corruption or malign Chinese influence. But then the way we talk about China, the country, and the government of China's policies trickles down into our domestic conversations, and it loses that nuance of the difference between the government, the PRC, the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people as a whole, or the Chinese ethnicity. So my question is how do we have these conversations about the People's Republic of China and its government's policies without negatively impacting Chinese Americans, Asian Americans in the United States, with these kind of oversimplifications about what a lot of people interpret as the Chinese character?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It is absolutely the rub, the nub here in terms of the conversations here in this country, right? And I do think we have to be very clear. It is the PRC, it is the Communist Party that we're having some challenges with, but not the people. And so we have to be very clear about that. The other issue that I've actually been very much faced with more recently is the bank actually has there's an unspoken unspoken policy, I want to say, and we're asking for evidence, by the way, unspoken policy against Taiwan in terms of promotion, in terms of people allowing to go to Taiwan. And so there's huge, it's also Chinese, right? So that's the nuance that I'm going to try to figure out how to get, there cannot be discrimination against Taiwan. By the way, they're called Taipei, China. We can't even, as the United States USED, I can call it Taiwan, but nobody else can apparently. And so that's something that I'm also very, very keenly aware of. But yes, the rhetoric, it cannot be simplified conversations. I have to say that, this week that I have been here and listening around the outskirts of all the meetings that have been going on, understanding a little bit about the Chinese economy and what they're facing too. They're not actually, they're going to have some trouble, particularly the zero tolerance, COVID tolerance, and the birth rates having taken a huge hit, the replacement of their labor force. So I think there is going to be challenges for that country that they're going to need our help with. So I was very clear with our Chinese friends that where we can find common ground, like around climate change, we should be working together. So those are going to be relationships that I'm going to have to build around. But I agree with you that we cannot be simplified in our rhetoric. And I feel it, like in San Francisco, my mom lives in San Francisco, my 95-year-old mother, New York, these big places where there's large Asian American populations, more so than anywhere else, the anti-Asian hate has manifests significantly, right? So I'm also aware when I'm walking down the street in San Francisco that there are these sentiments.
This is a really troublesome question because I think we've all learned, certainly from the time of President Trump, that words matter. And speaking of that, I think, Chantel, you were probably too busy to watch the 60 Minutes show this Sunday. But FBI Director Chris Wray, when interviewed, said that China is the biggest, greatest counterintelligence threat to the United States. That will, I think, add fuel to what the general public is thinking about in terms of Asian Americans. Anyway, there were other hands.
Ambassador Wong. My name is Lily Lamatina, and I'm a graduating student at George Washington University. I also work at the Seeger Center for Asian Studies and Stinson Center in their sustainability program. And I'm wondering, as a woman of color, how have you navigated certain challenges at the intersection of racism and sexism? I know you've spoken very positively about your career, but I'm also wondering what those challenges have been and how you've overcome some of the negative stereotypes that are attached to Asian women in the political sphere.
Oh gosh, I chose a career early on in my when I studied in water and wastewater engineering. That is a male-dominated world. And when I first got out of grad school, I started in the sewage treatment plant in San Francisco. They certainly didn't like me to tell them what to do. I had a graduate degree, but I knew I knew which buttons were. I think part of it is knowing we carry that extra burden to be extra smart, do our homework, have all the right answers. I mean, basically, you have to be extra, right? To counter always the sentiments out there. So you work harder, do your homework more, and then find alliances with others that could help you in your work. So it's not easy, I would say. And so getting together in a coalition, maybe what in your organization to help each other. And that's been the experience that I've had being in affinity groups that could help you be part of a larger number.
I think we have a question from Zoom.
Yes, there's a question from Mark O'Grady, and he says, there are many Asian American organizations in the US supporting its memberships. Do you all see any that have or would want to develop programs to help Asian Americans pursue government jobs? In Asia, there is high admiration for government jobs and teacher jobs. Do you see anything that can be done to encourage government service as a career in the US?
Chantel?
Well, that's all I've been really focused on is Kapal has been, what we try to do is to bring young Asian Americans to Washington. There's such a thing called Potomac fever. I don't know if many of you know about this. Once you come to Washington, you don't want to leave because this is so exciting to be part of.
Still,
Yeah, I don't know.
in this day of polarization,
Public service is still a higher calling, I think. So we try to put interns, we work with departments, encouraging them to do affinity programs that are targeted. And many agencies do have, I mean, USDA has been under receivership on being not diverse enough, for example, or Treasury even, I think has been known to be a white male dominated world. So we have to encourage that. We have to set up programs to get them in, to push for positions that could that provides those opportunities for the community, for those in building that pipeline I also talk about, and so that at some point we are in positions of influence that can bring others up with us.
that's mentorship.
That is mentorship, yes. I talk about that a lot. I mean, I was very, very lucky. I mentioned Alice Rivlin. She was my mentor for 30 plus years, for both my personal and my professional career.
That is lucky.
I'm very lucky.
And
right?
she's female.
And she's female. She talks about her experience. She started the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, and she talked about incidents where she was standing outside, where they were just standing up. Somebody thought she was the secretary and asked her to get a cup of coffee. She happens to be the director. But those are kind of in those days.
We have all experienced.
Yeah, we've all experienced that. Exactly. So mentorship is really important. But mentorship, I find, it's not just a one-way street. You know, it really takes work. It takes effort. I know that with Alice, I want to make sure I'm on her calendar every 2 weeks or every month, that we have lunch, we talk about my life, you know, like just seeking her advice on everything. Absent that, I always tell the young folks that you need to have set up a personal board of directors. That you go.
A personal board of directors.
Yeah.
Describe that.
Describe that. So you, not one person, for me, it was lucky that I have one person that provided both personal and professional career advice. But there might be ones that give you particular advice on some things, and then others that could give you advice on other things. So, you know, build that coalition and build that professional or personal board of directors. I would say, you know, have as many as you can and go and ask them for help.
I'm gonna borrow that. I really like that idea. Very good. Now, I saw other questions here. Is there any more from? Penny.
Thank you, Ambassador. Penny Yao, and I'm Senior Advisor at the Chinese American Museum in DC. It's a new museum, hope you visit. So my question is, I understand you started your career early on at the ADB and back now. What are the biggest changes that you have seen, you know, in the difference, challenges?
I talked about the crises that we face. 20 years ago, today, I actually am very comforted by the familiarity of I know the people who serve us, the people who the workers, they actually remember me, which is very comforting. They were
Very nice.
very happy to see me back. But so I had hope, and I want to see that it is a different bank, that the needs are, the world is much more complicated, the needs are very different, and that it should be a different bank. And so my goal is actually to change. I want to be the change agent at the ADB to make it change. For example, let me give you an example. We had a conversation more recently about how to really deal with the climate crisis. And ADB, because of actually the American vice president there, has been really in the forefront of this innovative way of thinking how to reduce carbon footprint. And we've always said, there's been always a conversation about that the climate change battle will be won or lost in the Asia Pacific region, by the way, because of the emitters, China, India.
But China is 28%, and the Asia region is 50%.
Exactly. So we cannot get to net zero 2050, or China is actually net zero 2060. We cannot get there without getting our ducks in row. And yet, the bank has been a infrastructure bank. Dealing with these reduction of carbon footprint will take a different set of skills, people, finance people, policy people, and infrastructure, but also to deal with the transition going out of coal or gas to and the impacts of the people that have been, the workers that have been in this sector, and how do you really transition out of that? That's going to take different skills of people, and a different bank to manage that.
But is it in the cards that the AIIB can take over the infrastructure projects?
So AIIB is very interesting. It's been 6 years in the making. They actually are a smaller footprint than ADB. They rely on ADB a lot for co-financing.
You wouldn't have known it by the publicity.
Yeah, yes, that's true. I don't think it may get there, but it's also in China, which has some challenges right now with COVID. And so I think it still is pretty nascent, if I might.
I think we have another, we're coming towards the end, but if you don't mind, there's a question here and we're gonna take you off if you don't mind staying. So we have another question from Zoom.
Yes, so this question comes from Jun Jin, Deputy General Counsel at USAID. And their question is, Jun says, congratulations on your appointment, Ambassador Wong. How racially diverse do you find leadership at the ADB and other international development banks? The World Bank has an anti-racism task force. Does the ADB have something similar?
Oh my gosh, ADB is probably even more basic than that. You know, before I joined the board, and Linda was the first Asian American on the board and first female. But this time around, 20 years, 30 years later, I joined the board. I'm the only female. What? Again.
I'm a little familiar with the ADB, going back many years. And I want to add to that question, given your background, Chantel, you're our last best hope, or maybe our best hope of possibly you're shaping the ADB to accelerate gender parity within Asia, in society and the workplace, and to bolster LGBTQ plus inclusion in the bank's projects across the region.
Yes, we have an opportunity to do that, as I mentioned, that the safeguards policy review is going on, and so the U.S. is going to lead in that front. And as you know, in many of these countries, there's criminalization of LGBTQ. So we have to. It's the vulnerable of the vulnerable people, and we talk about inclusive growth, right? The economies of these regions cannot fully reach its potential without being inclusive. And so those are the conversations that we're going to be having. You know, back to sort of the diversity question, it is an international institution. And so many countries provide civil servants to the institution. I know that we have about 150 out of 2,000. I don't know the exact number, but I know that there's 150 Americans at the ADB. So that's my flock. And I want to make sure that we have diversity there and to push the bank to accepting more and to help in terms of senior management. Actually, what I found, senior management positions for women have actually improved. And so it's really the board problem that there aren't that many women on the board. There's myself as the executive director, there's two other alternates. It's the New Zealand alternate, and the Chinese has as an alternate that is female. But these are all positions that are appointed there by their member governments, and so really need to be working through the civil societies of these governments to ensure that there is representation.
I'm going to take one more question before I go to the close.
Thank you. I'm Yuan Chen. I'm a visiting scholar here. I come from Fudan University, which is located in Shanghai. My major is comparative politics and political economy. So my question is, we all know that Chinese America has long been successful economically and educationally. Recently, there is a sign that they are becoming a new power in political field, such as your appointment and the mayor election result in Boston. So do you think, yes. Do you think this trend will continue? If so, what's the structural factors behind this phenomenon?
Well, I talk about Asian Americans AAPI. Actually, our community is not monolithic. There are Chinese Americans that are successful, and then there are Chinese Americans that are not. So I think it's not going to be an easy thing to broad brush that, and the community does have challenges. Those that come from refugee communities like Vietnamese. Now they're here, the second generation. And in the times that I've spent on the ground in these communities, we talk about those that are left behind, not necessarily all those that are successful, and that the successful ones need to help bring along those that have been left behind. This position of where I am, as we talk about, it's been 30-year gap. There should be less than that. I mean, it's been 30 years since Linda and myself. So what happened in between? There should be others and others that take leadership positions, but there are none. And so it's not a complete success story, but we need to keep working on that.
Let me try to answer the other part of your question, which is whether Chinese Americans, and we say Asian Americans, it makes it much more diverse and complicated, whether the Chinese Americans' participation in politics will rise. I mean, we just talked about Georgia, that the Chinese or the Asian American community being a factor in the winning of the Democrats, so that and the Republicans losing. I would say that the anti-Asian hate actually has galvanized the Asian American community as never before. It was just like the Vincent Chin case, way back when. It's the 40th anniversary of the Vincent Chin's murder by the two white men in Detroit, because they mistook him for a Japanese and they blamed him for losing their jobs. Anyway, but this has galvanized the Asian American community as never before. And I've seen a lot of rich Asian Americans coming forward with money to begin to balance or equalize the funding of Asian American causes. And that is, I believe, a positive sign. And I hope that it will continue. But those of you who have heard of the Vincent Chin case, this is the 40th anniversary. And in June, there will be many, many activities in Detroit particularly. But it's time to close. I wish this wonderful conversation, Chantel, doesn't stop. We'll continue this with your next visit to Washington, D.C. But let me go back to something that Ambassador Tsai Yang said. It really touched me. She said, your life did not begin when you were born. It's what her mother told her. Leave something behind for others. You are only a link in a chain for people who come after you. For me, this epitomizes leadership and mentorship, always helping the next generation be better, do better. The link between Linda and you speaks to that. So Chantel, my last question. What do you hope to leave behind for those who come after you? And let's hope it would not be another 30 years before the next US director to the ADB is a woman and a minority.
Or being the first openly gay lesbian to be named ambassador. I mean, that is also another legacy.
Well said.
You know, President Clinton nominated Jim Hormel 30 years ago.
I remember.
Right, and remember how tough that was to get that through to Luxembourg, I think it was. And over 30 years, there has been 24 gay white men, both career foreign service and political, that have been ambassadors. It's taken 30 years to get me there. And so I think that's a legacy, but I'm hoping that that's not, that I want to be joined by many more and hurriedly, not have to wait a long time. But it is that next generation. You know, I think about my daughter. We talk about being proud of, you know, I am proud of being a mother, being able to nurture a young mind into this difficult and challenging world. And that is the legacy that I think we all need to think about, is that next generation. That we need to all be part of making the world a better place.
Chantel, Ambassador Chantel Wong, thank you so very much.